Good evening, YouTube, or good day if you're watching from some other part of the globe. Although I kind of doubt that, since this is only my second video. Besides the point though. Okay, so let's dive into the first lecture of our permaculture series that I'm going to be releasing. I'm not sure on how many videos per week or day, but that I will be consistently releasing throughout the tenure of my channel. And so my prior video, my introductory video to my channel, just covered the overall schema of what I'm going to be doing here. Part of that schema was our permaculture series with our first lecture scheduled for tonight or today. And what I wanted to do in my first lecture was just give a brief overview of what exactly permaculture is and the sorts of ethics and values, philosophy behind agriculture. So I kind of wanted to go out of order here and start with a diagram, a visual representation to get us started off. I know me personally, I enjoy diagrams, I enjoy visual aids, so I thought we'd start off with one just to help us segue into the actual definition of permaculture. So the diagram I have drawn up here, it involves 3 different pictures. I'm sorry if it's kind of hard to see with the glare of my camera, but for now I'm only using my phone. Hopefully soon, the next couple of lectures, I will have a more appropriate camera for this type of video making. But anyways, my first picture is of contemporary or Western agriculture. So that's the type of agriculture you'll see, where we live in the US, especially in the Midwest. I mean, I personally live in the Midwest, so I'm very familiar with the types of agricultural techniques or sites we have here. So that would be a very good representation of what we have going on here in the Midwest. I don't really like the word Western though, because you can see this type of agriculture is not exclusively seen in the West. I mean, you can find this other parts of the globe too, in the Eastern Hemisphere. Might not be as common there. They have different sorts of techniques. They have like terrace type of agriculture and sometimes more sustainable types of agriculture, but they do heavily use this type as well. So what you see in the contemporary agriculture is you'll have your house out front. That's usually the farmer's house or whatever sort of housing, maybe a tree or whatever sort of landscape is in the front yard. And then you'll have your 1 or 2 crops on your actual farmland. Maybe 1, 2, 3, 4 crops that you might rotate throughout the year. Usually it's just one. Usually it's one to a designated area. So maybe in this example we'll just call this wheat. Then you have your combine harvesting all the wheat. And so yeah, you'll have a large area in the first example where whatever was there beforehand, whatever sort of ecology, say like in the Midwest it would be a prairie, say there was a prairie there beforehand, that's entirely just seen as a plot of land. Whatever sort of plants, whatever sort of organisms are already present there are kind of disregarded, and everything is made way for 1, 2, 3, 4 crops. Now comparing that to a B, which is 3 years into a transitional period of taking the traditional site and slowly turning it into a permaculture site or permaculture community. What we have here in B is we have the same housing, maybe not entirely retrofitted yet. Maybe it doesn't have solar panels or a rain collector yet, but we're slowly moving towards that sort of idea. And but as far as the actual land usage goes, we have We have tree crops propping up. We might still have some of our grain crops. You know, maybe we kept the wheat. Maybe we added some corn or something. But you start to see more tree crops propping up. You might have some different beds in the middle, different garden beds in the middle, but mainly more trees, more, you know, fruit trees, more forestry basically. Because what permaculture is really trying to do is rehabilitate, you know, a piece of land that it's trying to take it back to its original state while still, you know, including usable crops or usable animals within the entire framework of the site. So that would be like 3 years into the transition, and then the last picture in the diagram, it would be where up to 70% of the cropland, of the original cropland, is entirely devoted to forage farming. Forage farming meaning like you have a good amount of forestry or a more, let's say, wild type of habitat where you can still forage food from. So if we take a little overlook at the overall transition, what's essentially happening is or the basic changes being made. They involve replacing any sort of forage grains with tree crops. So even in the last stage, like, we don't have really that many forage grains. It's mostly just your fruits, your vegetables, maybe some chickens running around foraging on the low-lying areas between the trees. That doesn't necessarily mean that, you know, the forage grains can't be included in the final stage. It's just, you know, in some designs, that's just the way it has to be for a smart design. That would be for another chapter, though. That would be for a more advanced chapter. But yeah, that too, and just increasing the overall forest cover of the site. So in the last picture, you have the most amount of tree coverage, and adapting to low to no tillage on the remaining cropland. So not really messing with the soil too much, letting the soil kind of build up over time and recover its health. Because that's what we see today in our traditional form of agriculture. We really overtill the soils, and that puts a lot of stress and really damages it over time. And that's why we see such a, you know, large mineral and overall nutrient loss in a lot of today's crops. Even like conventionally raised fruits and vegetables don't have nearly the amount of nutrients they did, you know, 80, 100, 200 years ago. So that's part of one problem permaculture is trying to address. So yeah, this is the entire diagram of that entire transitional period. I thought it gives a good visual as to what permaculture actually looks like. I know it's a pretty crude representation. I think in any future videos I might include, you know, actual pictures of different sites, but for now I thought this would be a nice little diagram to include. So yeah, moving forward, as far as what the ethical basis for agriculture is, we have 3 main principles that I'm going to write up here on the board. So, the ethical basis of permaculture. And these are coming directly from the first chapter I read. I may add my own commentary here and there on, different aspects or different parts of the chapter that I decided to incorporate in the lecture. But for the most part, I'm going to leave it very untainted, very raw, because the videos are not only for anyone willing or inclined to watch, but they're also for me to better understand and better integrate everything that I read in the chapter. Because I mean, as you all know, I'm sure even in our elementary school, in our middle school, high school, even university, your teachers would always reiterate to you. They'd always say, if you truly understand a subject, if you truly know what was taught in the subject, you're able to teach it in your own way to either a fellow student, a teacher, a class. You're able to teach it. It shows that you have a true understanding. So this is also a tool for me to show to myself that I know what I'm talking about. Bear with me though. I think this is my first video. I'm giving myself a little slack too. But that's what it is essentially. It's a learning curve for both parties. It's a learning curve for my viewers and for me. So, moving on. The first principle, or the first ethical principle of permaculture, deals with the care of the earth and the second deals with care of people. The third principle involved deals with setting limits to population and consumption. Now, with the first principle involved in the ethical basis of permaculture, that being the care of the earth, what that deals with is providing for all life systems to continue and multiply. So the earth is, before humans came along and civilization came along, the earth always had a way of doing things. There's always natural systems in place. And I wouldn't say we're just now, but we are kind of recognizing or acknowledging these sort of natural systems and natural laws in place. And so what we're here to do in terms of the permaculture outlook or the permaculture perspective is we're here as stewards and stewardesses for the planet and for these natural systems that were already here in place beforehand. A forest naturally is regenerating and takes care of itself over time without any sort of human interaction or human upkeep. So it's only like when humans need to survive, right? And we're taking account of different resources and how to properly live in tandem with the natural environment. That's when we have to understand how to provide for these systems, because not only are we taking from them, but we have to provide in turn. So that's what that first main principle means. Now the second main principle is care of people, and this kind of goes along with what I was just saying, that we use surrounding areas for their resources, surrounding natural areas for their resources, either for their food, either for minerals, or for building materials, so on and so forth. And so this would fall under the category of care for people. we want to strike that balance where we're able to provide for people access to these necessary resources for their existence. And then the third principle deals with setting limits to our population and our consumption. So like how we live nowadays, we live a very, let's just say, overconsumptive lifestyle, and if we don't, address this in some sort of way, some sort of fashion soon, which is what permaculture strives to do, we're running the risk of perishing pretty soon. I mean, we're kind of at that cusp of, I'm sure you've heard this, different media outlets, not just media outlets, but, reputable sources, scientific articles, etc., that we're kind of at a turning point where we're gonna decide in the next couple decades or so if our species, lives or goes extinct. I wouldn't say go extinct, but where we face some extreme scenarios that we'd rather avoid. So yeah, the third principle just deals with governing our own needs and how we can properly set aside resources to further the above principles. Now, one important principle, that was the ethical basis. I mean, I'm giving you the basic version. Bill kind of refined it down to three basic things, and I think that pretty much encapsulates what sort of ethical grounds that permaculture stands on. But if there's one important principle that I'd like to address outside of that, it's the principle of cooperation. So just give me a moment to write that up on the board. Now, cooperation is an integral principle as a part of permaculture design. It's what the entire philosophy and design system runs on. The reason being is because life in general, nature and just life in general, is cooperative and it's not competitive. Rather than competitive, I should say. Even if you look at bacteria, right? Just very low levels of life, very low life forms. They live by collaboration, accommodation, exchange, and different barriers they set. So one is not trying to conquer the other or subdue others for different advantages. Kind of how different areas of our life run nowadays. We live on a very harsh monetary system where essentially coins dictate the way we live. So it's about coming together essentially. This is a collaborative effort, is what I'm basically trying to say here with the principle of cooperation. And the cool thing about permaculture is that it's entirely possible. It's not like a totally out there, idealistic, utopian vision. Although it is in a sense, it's based on a lot of very sound and rational thinking. It's not totally futuristic or utopian. Like it's actually very down to earth type of thinking. So. But in that sense, it's totally possible to do, because we don't have to invent some sort of new technology, some sort of outlandish technology to make this type of living a reality. We already know to build, maintain, and inhabit sustainable systems. We've already shown that. We have plenty of real life examples where we've already proved that's possible. And I'd say every essential problem is solved. But in the everyday life of people, this is not very apparent. It's mostly because, like the wage slave, peasant, landlord, and industrialist, that type of setup. All these types of characters alike are deprived of the leisure and the life spirit that is possible in a cooperative effort, which applies its knowledge. So the way we interact with one another now, and our different hierarchies, it's not necessarily in the most cooperative manner. We can do better, essentially. So another way I can explain permaculture and what it is, I think this will be the last way I explain because my video is running a bit long. I kind of already covered, what it looks like, the ethics behind it, the philosophy behind it, but I kind of want to add one more definition to round out this lecture. So a basic question that can be asked in two ways is, what can I get from this land or person? Or what does this person or land have to give if I cooperate? So these are basically two different approaches to the same scenario, whether it be a plot of land or a person. One approach, one question. The first one is, what can I get from this land or person, period? What is it in for me? What can I extract from this individual or this plot of land, right? Which is entirely opposite to, the previously mentioned ethical principles of first care of the earth and care of people. Versus the second type of approach, which asks, what does this person or land have to give if I cooperate with them? That way it's more of a mutual understanding, a more mutual effort, and everyone wins in the end in that way. So yeah, these two approaches kind of give you, like these two questions kind of give you another way of looking at the sort of lens permaculture puts in front of a person with that type of mindset, thinking. And I think to end this lecture, I want to give my own sort of commentary or my own sort of take on what permaculture is, because I know I've been covering the different principles and ethics of the mentioned in the first chapter, but my own take on permaculture is that it's simply a entirely integrated way of living. So, you know, you might go like nowadays, if you say you live in Chicago, like I live in Chicago, right? You branch out from the city, and the city is a dense place. It's mostly just streets, buildings. There is some greenery. There are parks. Chicago does a very wonderful job of all that. But for the most part, you don't see a lot of, you might have your community garden here or there, but you don't see a very integrated approach to living with the natural environment. Everyone's mostly just boxed up, cubed up. And then you move out to, say, the suburbs, which would be the area that I live in. You know, there's varying degrees of suburbs. You know, it becomes more and more obvious the further you get away from the city, until eventually, you know, you reach the very rural areas where you see, you know, our traditional type of farming. And when you move to the suburbs, you know, you see all these beautiful landscapes, beautiful yards, beautiful houses, communities, neighborhoods. And some of the landscapes they're absolutely gorgeous, absolutely well-designed landscapes, but they don't have, unless you do it yourself, you know, unless you put out gardens yourself, or maybe do a design yourself, you don't see people, like, you know, growing their own food. You know, there might be a handful of people who do, you know, growing their own food on site, or something along those lines, and maybe sharing it with their neighbors or whatever. Most of it, if someone did that, if someone transformed their yard into a permaculture site, you know, you might get, you know, some complaints from the neighbors. You might get contacted by the HOA, the homeowners association. It could be a whole slew of things you'll run into. So, but it only makes sense to live like that. Like, you don't have to be transporting food from miles and miles away. You know, you might have whatever design you have there, your greenhouse, your trees, your animals, and you essentially have a bunch of little villages, millions and millions of villages spread across the state, spread across the nation. So that's kind of the idea behind permaculture, is saying, hey, we have a prairie, we have a forest here, we have a desert type environment. What are the natural organisms associated with that environment? You know, what plants or animals are already here? How can we best design whatever site we're going to plan on having, so that each organism is in its appropriate place to work as harmoniously as possible together to provide, you know, a self-sustaining site with very minimal input from the villagers. But also being able to provide more than enough, you know, resources and food for the people living there. It just, yeah, that would be like my own view or take on it, or vision per se. So yeah, I think this is a good place to end for our first lecture. I'm gonna rewatch this and see what I need to tinker around with or play around with to make the next lecture better. I know I can kind of notice on my video screen that the glare is totally obfuscating whatever I'm putting on the board. So I gotta get a better camera. But yeah, thank you all for watching. I hope you got something out of this video. I hope you enjoyed me lecturing to you. And yeah, until next time, thank you.